I do not consent.
Hello, viewers. Hello, Bill.
Hello, Sandi. How are you?
Fine.
Fine.
I'm not sure if anybody else has noticed this if they're doing Zoom calls, but they've started introducing a sort of automated automaton voice that comes on and says, "You are recording." So hours of endless fun with that. But
Yeah, the best part is at the end when it goes, "The recording has ended" or something. It's very dramatic.
well, we're going to be quite dramatic tonight, maybe. Who knows?
Excellent.
Darkness falls.
Now, where did this title come from for you? By the
Well,
way, can I reiterate that most of the time you create these slide decks, I get one flip through them for 5 seconds a piece, and then we talk about them, but I'm essentially coming in cold every time. I just like to reiterate that, I'm jumping into the water, trusting that the water is warm and not shark infested.
what do you want, a medal?
No, I'm just saying that, to temper, my comments with like a little grain of salt. I'm mixing a lot of metaphors there, but go ahead. Where did Darkness Falls come from?
Well, I was thinking about Goya this week, the painter, the Spanish painter. And I was thinking about how there is a sense of descent into maybe like a madness or melancholy. But of course, it didn't stay like that. It started to morph a little bit into quite simply being about darkness and how artists, especially photographers, have used that in some way to express their stories. And when I then thought about what famous photographs there are about darkness, there probably are many, but I actually couldn't think of any immediately. And gradually, what I did realize is I went back through my archive of all the stuff I talked to students about, and I picked out a few select things. And I realized that they also had other commonalities, maybe.
Okay.
Okay, so.
Can I just say one thing that's interesting about photography when it comes to darkness
Mm,
is that I think a lot of people, I can imagine that painters who paint dark are generally looking at something dark, where with photography, because you have control over exposure, you can make something that's not dark, dark, basically day for night sort of photography.
yeah.
So you have the ability to create something. Of course, you have this in, say, painting or drawing, but I don't think most painters would do a day for night version of what's in front of them.
Mm,
They would paint what's in front of them, and if they wanted it at night, they would go at night. Where I think photographers have this could be waves on the shore. Well, not because of the sky, but you know what I'm saying. It could be at dusk or something, and we don't even know. Um, or clouds that are moving or whatever, but like you have so much control over that with exposure. I think it's an interesting element of it all.
yeah. Well, is it an irony that we're talking about darkness when we're talking about photography at all?
Yeah.
And, in the past, we've talked about Susan Derges, who's made many beautiful and extraordinary prints simply with the light of the moon. And so then I started thinking about this idea of moonlight and something magical, I suppose, in darkness. So where I started much more from a sort of psychologically dark start point and I guess kind of color-based darkness through Goya, I then really wanted to try and move it back into this zone of, certainly in the first three images, a sense of nature, photography, ironies. Anyway, this is by Melissa Fleming. And I
You
think
know, it, what's also interesting, sorry to cut you off for 1 second, is the idea that with a painter, their initial canvas is white, where technically, you know, photographers are, if you get no light in there, it's always black. Black is the default, and we're adding light to it versus somebody who's painting is usually adding darkness to something that is light. Dark. Sorry, go ahead. Melissa Fleming.
Melissa Fleming, I think, is an unsung hero of photography. And if you look her up, which I hope lots of you do, there are many things about her that make her fascinating just as a human. She is interdisciplinary. In fact, she describes herself as an intersectional artist. She's at the intersection of art and science. I saw her work first years ago in a publication, I think by Phaidon, in one of their big compendium books. And always thought that it was this image or a very similar image or from the same series, Sentient. They were hauntingly beautiful. And again, thinking about sort of formative experiences as a viewer with photography, I do remember thinking to myself that this was stretching what I believed a photograph could be at the time. So I would have been probably studying photography at art college when I first saw this. And I just thought it was, well, we've mentioned painting, but it is very painterly. And
Yeah, I mean, you could recreate this in paint, and it would be if you were a certain kind of painter, you could make it nearly indistinguishable unless you really got zoomed in on it to try to figure out what was going on.
yeah. Anyway, I mean, the artist is interested in kind of whether natural phenomena. In fact, she's got a blog called the Weather Gamut that you
Okay.
can look up. She travels extensively. She's a graduate of Parsons School of Design. She's also got some other, she's highly qualified in kind of all these different things, a real polymath, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Her website is beautiful. If people want to go and have a look at it, I'd really recommend it. It's very, very beautiful photographs, but also actually as a work of art in itself, her website's very good, her photography website. And I would say that the work is very much about like these transient moments in a natural world. And I love the idea that there would be somebody out at night with their camera on the waves recording them. And that the purpose of that is not obvious and, of course, open to all kinds of suggestion and interpretation. But simply as a sort of phenomena in itself, this moment is strikingly beautiful to me.
This, to me, this looks like it is artificial light used to light the waves, which it probably is, right? Or a street light or headlights somewhere, something like that, where, it is darkness, but there's still, it's only because of humans that we can see anything at all, if that makes sense. In this case, if it was for whatever reason a moonlit night and we see the tops of waves, but we don't see the water underneath it because, the moon is just catching the crest, glints on the crests or something. To you as a viewer, does the fact that there is definitely sometimes you can look at a photograph and even though obviously somebody took it, it feels like you're one with whatever sort of nature is in front of the camera, where this one, it's implicit that there is someone around because otherwise you wouldn't be able to see this because it would require some sort of light on it. Does that change the way you see it versus it being sort of a virgin nature photo? Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm not sure I agree with what you're saying, actually.
Okay.
So this to me is as much about mystery and imagination as it is about the ocean as the natural phenomena I know is being recorded. So there's kind of like a dual purpose in this, or a duality, certainly in how I read it, which is that I don't register human presence. I mean, I feel as if I'm with this moment. So in that sense, there's no distance between me and those waves, yet I know that that can't be because my presence would somehow impact them, disrupt them, even if it is simply by the light I may shine upon the scene. The fact that there's so much movement on what we register as a surface, and that seems to not stop just because it's a still photograph, is kind of fascinating. And of course, it's such a useful trick and an obvious trick, a bit of drag and a bit of blur. But in this photograph, it's more than that. It does have that painterly sense or feeling of it being ongoing beyond the photograph, almost into this other, I guess, other realm or something. The heavy black of the sky also is like,
Well, I
it's
mean, it's a super negative space on the, I mean, this photograph is interesting because a less thoughtful artist could say, well, I'm just going to crop it down to the waves. But the waves aren't what makes this photo, you know?
yeah. I mean, it is part of a bigger series.
Yeah.
So there are lots of photographs in Sentient, and they're all so incredibly different, but of course all about exactly the same thing. We've got these heavy black, we've got the waves moving with blur, we've got these high points, high pickup points of light. They're mesmerizing in the way that the ocean is actually.
Yeah. Do you feel that way about the ocean? Are you one of those people who's seduced by the ocean?
Mm-hmm.
You live quite near the ocean, right? Not too far away.
I live right near the ocean. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think you need to live near the ocean?
Yeah, probably.
Some people feel strongly about it, is the reason I ask.
Yeah, I think it's a thing.
Can you imagine being one of those people from, say, Kansas who's never seen the ocean?
No. Don't forget, I
Yeah,
mean,
man, that
I've grown up and I live on actually a tiny island. And especially in Scotland, you know, you can drive 2 hours in either direction and encounter the sea.
yep.
And I spent my childhood in and around Scottish islands.
Yeah.
So I think having the sea there is enormously comforting, which in itself might sound foolish because, of course, the ocean is so incredibly dangerous. And that's the other thing.
Oh, yeah. I find the ocean very scary. I don't find it comforting.
Well, okay, so I think, and this is from the artist herself. The ocean is simultaneously dangerous and beautiful. Photographing at night, when the ocean feels most unknown and unnavigable, our perception of it changes in the dark.
Yeah, it's
I
very
also,
foreboding, this image to me.
well, I like that sense that actually, you know, we have a sense of familiarity with things, even when they're things of enormous change, which of course the ocean is always moving. But in the daylight, do we find it less menacing? Or rather, in the dark, do we find it more menacing? You know, I think a lot of people find real horror in the ocean at night.
Yeah. It's the interesting thing to me is that over time, yes, the ocean's always changing, waves are going by, whatever. But the more that I actually learned about how waves work, it's the water's actually not moving. The energy's moving through the water to a large extent. So it's interesting that like the water as it's sitting there isn't actually moving all that much. It's like energy is going through it. So you're totally right. But from like a physical physics point of view, lately I tend to look at the ocean and think, oh, it's just this big pile of water that stuff is moving through like air, right? Like air isn't always moving just because you and I are talking to each other and stuff, you know, and our voices can be heard. Why are you laughing at me?
Just laughing.
Yeah, I find the ocean, if I think about it too much, it's like going on an airplane. It freaks me out if I think about it too much.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm in the ocean and I know that it gets super deep, a couple 100 meters out, you know, that kind of thing. Like there's a cliff underwater that is, I just imagine the Leviathan that's going to come up and eat me.
Yeah, well, I think also, you know, we're talking about the surface and how the light is picking up on the surface of this,
Yeah,
but you know, are we aware that there's something beneath or behind it?
sure.
And actually, it's not just in the light or white space of this image, but that black that we know it, we read it as the sky, but you know, what's in it? And so, I mean, your physical understanding of this as a physical thing, and perhaps even Melissa Fleming would talk about this in context of it being a physical thing. There is nonetheless this sense, dare I say it again, magic. There's something magical about this, otherworldly, something that is, for some people, really spooky.
Yeah.
Mm.
There's also, I think, a permanence and a transientness, excuse me, where, it's within the lifetime of all humans, that ocean will be there doing that same thing day after day, night after night. And yet, this exact moment, this exact combination of light that hits this, that goes into this woman's camera, will never happen again.
Mm.
It's both deep time and fleeting simultaneously.
Doesn't it make that, or this, one of the most amazing and extraordinary things to photograph?
The ocean.
Mm.
I think the ocean is very difficult to photograph well.
Mm.
I think the best things, you could argue that the things that photograph that can lead to the most depth are often the most difficult things to photograph. It's like they have incredible potential, but it's very hard to do it well. I think portraits are a little bit like that. There's a billion pictures of people, but how many portraits do we actually remember and think about?
All of yours, Bill, of course.
No, not mine. Other people's. People who are good at it. Where's this photograph from? Just like Louisiana?
Yeah. So Mississippi, maybe.
Does Mississippi sound like a silly word to you coming from the UK?
No.
Okay. There's lots of Mississippi.
Well, that's like saying to somebody, does echo feckin sound stupid?
Yes, it does.
Well, that's your problem then, isn't it? Because that is actually a place, or Ballahoola, or any of these like places that have names that are particular to their places. I sort of love. So Mississippi,
everywhere in Wales.
Everywhere in Wales, quite a lot in Scotland.
Yeah.
Anyway,
sorry, you were going to say Aurelia.
He's based in New Orleans. And I think it was Keith Dotson first put me onto him. So he's a relatively new source for me to use. And I have started using him and teaching quite a lot in terms of photographing water, actually. Again, really, really good website. People want to go and have a look at it. But this photograph is called Aurelia.
Why does this photograph speak to you specifically in contrast to, other photographs of similar? Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that it's to me, compositions right down the middle, classic reflections of the stuff on the top half, like all of those things.
Yep.
Okay, it's by moonlight. I mean, all of the standard stuff. Why this one versus any of the other million that are similar to this?
Okay, so I think this is it's about a whole body of work, actually. Now, obviously, I'm only one image, but I know that this photographer does go out into the water. Like he actually goes out neck deep into the water to make these photographs.
Okay. That's creepy.
And
because there's alligators down there.
Yeah. But also there's lots of work, I think, from this kind of area as well that has a real melancholy. Now, perhaps it's because there's like a legacy left over from Hurricane Katrina, but there are lots of photographs from closer to his home in New Orleans where we see buildings kind of half submerged.
Well, I think there's a certain level of just sort of poverty in the American South that it has a weight to it as well.
Well, it does have a weight, but also the other reason why I picked this image for today is actually what he wrote about it. I'm very similar in many ways to Melissa Fleming. He's a very good, or rather very eloquent, fluent speaker and writer about his work.
Do you think that is a requirement of being an artist?
No, I don't. I think
Okay.
it's very useful when I do think it's useful when the audience wants to engage with artwork in a more cerebral way, of course.
For the artist to be able to explain themselves.
Yes. And
Do
I
you
mean,
think that the way they explain themselves is always what actually is going on in their head? Or do you think
no,
that they backfill that story sometimes?
often, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think I don't see a problem actually with any of that. And also, I have to say that when I'm teaching, I'm making sure that I'm teaching the ability to do that as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Sorry, you were going to quote him. I cut you off. Go ahead.
oh, no. I photograph to document place and change, but also to express feeling that provides a starting point for others' memories and imagination. Science reveals many insights, but do we know why the moon moves our mood? And in this particular image, Aurelia, which by the way, I find an unusual title, Aurelia, I think, which means spun from gold, which is usually sun, solar, not lunar.
Well, to be fair, even moonlight is coming from the sun.
To be fair, of course, Bill. But also, he said that for 15 years, he's been going out and shooting these sometimes quite bleak seeming waterways, and always at night. But he'd actually never captured the moon's face. Her face had always been somehow changed through his photographing, and that this image was true to the moon somehow. Now, I mean, this really piques my interest because I'm very interested in lunar. I'm interested in kind of, I guess, like a mythology around the moon and like goddess symbol, and the idea that somebody is neck deep in the water waiting. And by the way, notice the date on it isn't a year, it's just July 19th.
Yep.
That's because actually this was shot in a particular year. It's obviously a relatively new photograph, but the photographer is very specific about the day and the date because of the weather conditions and how that impacted how he was able to shoot.
Yep.
Now, I agree with you. I think this photograph in many ways could be just the same as any other lovely image we might put as a screensaver, or, you know, what really does set it apart? Well, truthfully, the thing that sets it apart for me is the moon.
You know what? You know what's funny about this is that I look at this, and even as you're describing that he was neck deep in the water and that's the moon or whatever, I think to myself, if there was a dock to the right and I had a really high powered strobe and I underexposed the rest of the frame, I could shoot this during the daytime and that could be the sun. Like, it's funny that the sort of technical games that go on in my head, even just seeing this as the moon, I don't necessarily trust it as the moon, even though I'm sure it is.
Well, the thing is, Bill, do you know, to me, and I think this is where you and I kind of do often part ways, is, do you know, if he's told a lie to get his
Mm-hmm.
story and to make me feel and know something,
You're all right with that.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
That
don't
is
mind.
definitely where you and I split.
I don't mind being deceived. And I think that's
Yeah.
why, you know, there's a childishness, I suppose, to what I like, isn't there? You know, sometimes I know I'm being kidded on, but I can suspend that to just take some sort of, I guess it's pleasure from believing something or seeing something for the sake of its magic again.
Yeah.
You know, I
Hey,
don't
listen,
really,
I like Darren Brown too. You know,
I just don't, I don't always want the magic trick proved to me.
yeah. I guess that's the thing. It's like I want to go behind the curtain and figure out how they did it.
Hmm.
You know, it's just a different. It for me
Whereas I want
to
to talk to them about what it means.
right. Yeah. 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 Where in some ways I don't care as much about what it means.
I know. Which is
Well,
amazing that you've agreed to talk to me for all these many weeks about the
well,
meaning of things.
because in some ways, I mean, you can have an interpretation of this photograph. I can have an interpretation of this photograph. There are 8 billion people in the world, all of whom could have a different interpretation of this photograph. Then what do any of our interpretations mean if they're all different? That
Well,
doesn't get us any closer to anything.
oh no, but it's not about us getting closer to something for the purposes of proving to each other that we can get close to a point. And I think we sort of came up upon this point in another
Yep.
conversation we had,
Yep.
where really you and I sharing our opinions is of course what we do. We're not telling other people what to think in any way by our Thursday night speaking of seeing stuff.
Yep.
We're having a conversation, a dialogue between friends, and we're going through that conversation to discover new things. And if other people want to take part in that through listening or by having triggers that then they go and think about things, that's absolutely amazing. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
But actually, you and I just sitting there saying, I like this photograph because, and then you say, well, I don't like this photograph because. I think that's dull as ditch water.
Absolutely.
And so you're right. But I don't discount how important it is that we all do have
Yeah.
these opinions,
Sure.
whatever they are.
Yeah.
Anyway, the fact that this may or may not be the moon is irrelevant to me because I believe it to be the moon, and because I then am transported in this extraordinary machine that photography is, this transmogrifier, this, I'm not going to call it a time machine, but I suppose it is a time machine.
Sure.
To feel this place, be this moment. And again, very similar to the Fleming, I don't necessarily have a sense of my own presence, although I know myself to be there. I'm not on a pontoon.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware.
And of these two,
there's a distinction of self a little bit in this as well.
Yeah.
There's not a person identifier in these, which is enormously liberating in looking.
Does one of them speak to you more than the other?
As a photograph, this.
Yeah, me too.
It's just so beautiful.
It's nice. Yeah.
Whereas this one, I want to get into the story that's set up for me.
Have you spent time in places like this? Like mangrove swamps and bogs and stuff?
No, I've never been. Well, that's very... I mean, I have been to the
Everglades. Yeah.
Yeah. But
go to Disney.
I'd love to go further up and along and into Louisiana.
Yeah, it's they are places that feel that there's also a timelessness to these kinds of places specifically in a different way than the ocean. Those places, places like Louisiana and that kind of thing, it feels sort of primordial, like it's always been this way. It will always be this way. All this stuff is living. It's all just a big giant maze. It's chaos. It's entropy in action. All of which makes me very uncomfortable being there.
Does it?
Yes, very much so. Do not like it. Could not live there. It's a very different thing than, say, the primordial feeling of going to, a sequoia grove or something like that, up in the mountains. That also has a certain permanence to it, but it's different than this.
Do you feel that these places have a horror imbued?
Yeah, they're haunted.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're sort of, they're ready to wear to turn into a scary film where somebody's killing people.
And you don't like scary films, do you?
Do not like scary films. This Sally Mann photo, also kind of scary film feeling.
I know.
This is where in Virginia? Where is this one?
It just is from the Deep South series. I mean, she did.
Oh, Deep South, though. Yeah.
Yeah, she did title them. I think it's Louisiana, Virginia, and then this is Deep South, and this is called Bones too. I mean,
Now, this is different because she's also shooting big camera.
Yeah,
And
although I was
probably wet plate.
talking about her work, and she was saying how she does make dreadful mistakes, and so she has to redo things.
Yeah. I mean, there's, especially with like a lot of the collodion kind of stuff that she often does. I mean, there's a imperfectness to it that can lead to happy accidents, but can also just lead to big giant messes, you know? And yeah, no, I mean, that's a whole other interesting thing is artists who use complicated processes,
Process
like, processes.
processes.
Yes, I guess so. Um,
Speak properly, Bill.
like, the woman you mentioned earlier who does the thing by moonlight that we saw in the water. Yeah. Um, sometimes I think we assume that people who use techniques or equipment or very time consuming staged uh, um, magic, as it were, where it's like conjuring almost, whether it's using view cameras or using old chemical processes or that kind of thing. I think we tend to think that of them as sort of scientists, oh, he's making a daguerreotype. He must know all of the chemistry that's involved in the thing. But I think a lot of people who do that kind of stuff aren't necessarily, deep chemists. And they do make mistakes because, I had a thing this last week. We spent some time with my wife's little sister, who's 18, who's going to college. And we were coming up with pieces of advice, things you wish you knew when you were 18, you know. And one of the things that I came up with days after she left was that most people are making it up most of the time. People are making it up as they go along. And the great majority of people are making it up as they go along, and they don't know better than you do. And that's okay, And so in some ways, like, I like the idea that you say that you were surprised by the fact that she screws it up, or sometimes the exposure is totally wrong because she measured it wrong, or she, hit the wrong aperture or shutter speed or whatever it is. That makes me feel like, oh, this person's not some, what would be the German term, like, uber person, like some sort of, god, essentially. They're just people.
I don't think it diminishes. I don't think Sally Mann has diminished her status in my mind as a goddess, because she made mistakes. I think what I really thought when I heard her talking about that was more how expensive those mistakes are, and
I think she can afford it at this point.
yes, probably. But anyway, for those people who don't know Sally Mann, most famous, we have to come back.
Okay, don't say it. Just don't even say it. Let the woman lie with the stuff that she doesn't want to talk about anymore.
Okay, but it is right to mention that her photographs always do have a really haunting beauty, I think.
And they do. Do you think that is because of the process she uses, or do you think it's because of the subject matter that she chooses to shoot? How much of it is just the chemistry, and that's adding its own pixie dust on top of what she chooses to photograph? And if she just shot it with her phone or with a 5D, it wouldn't be the same.
I think each one of these photographs by Sally Mann is about the photograph by Sally Mann. And that isn't me trying to be cryptic, but
it's like, it's a little reductive there, Sandi, but go ahead.
No, but I don't think I separate, in her case, actually, process with context.
Okay.
I think they are the same for her. because they're part of the same language of beauty, I think. All I mean is that, she's aware of the processes that she will use in order to get something that approximates, I guess, a plan, although I don't actually think she does plan that much.
It does inhabit a dreamlike state, a lot of her images, though. That
Yeah,
sort of warm tone, lots of stuff in distanced, out of focus, but not super bokeh. Like it's got that mist over it,
yeah, it does. And I just want to mention this is in a wider series, and she's an excellent photographer for books, for making beautiful bookwork. So to pick up a Sally Mann book is to really open into a world of beauty.
Do you, in the same way that musicians are complaining about the sort of death of the album versus single songs,
Hmm.
do you think that there's a death of the collection for an artist versus single images for visual artists?
No, no,
You don't think that's happening, or you don't think that it's a problem?
I don't think it's a problem, because I think people. Oh, why am I trying to talk about people? Just from my own point of view, I enjoy enormously spending time, real time, with the collection.
I think we should do that one time. Make one of our shows, if you can find a 10 or 15 image series by one artist.
Hmm.
Because sometimes we do like these shallow sort of hit and run dives into a particular artist, but maybe going deep into the context of one of them. I mean, I know you do this obviously when you talk to artists, like all the people other than me that you've ever talked to. You go deep into their work. Um,
I have actually done that with your work as well, Bill. Let's not forget.
have you? Sorry. Yeah. I mean, we should do that. That would be fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, Sally
So
Mann.
what do you think of this one? Now, this is another one where it might not necessarily be shot at night.
No, I don't think it is in this case. But
Yeah, I
there's
think this is
a
day for
sense
night.
that darkness falls with this.
Yeah.
Darkness falls also because it wasn't actually about this series. She was talking about her Battlefield series. She was at the Frink talking with Edmund Duval, the English potter, and highly learned and scholarly individual. And the two of them were talking about the importance of place in their work.
Yep.
And they were sharing stories about how they've reached where they are in their artistic careers. And Sally Mann was talking about the land being kind of imbued with death, and that land is just an accretion of remains.
Yeah.
And in context of darkness falls, the sense of like the curtain coming down on the living, I find that even in this photograph, and she wasn't actually talking about this series, but I find it in a lot of her, and most of her landscape work, in fact. This sense that darkness does fall. There is it isn't horror, and it's also not desperately, gut-wrenchingly sad, but there is a poignancy to it, quiet poignancy.
Death.
Slowly we are being turned down. Slowly we're being silenced. Slowly we're fading to black. And I sort of, I know it's
Do you
weird.
do you feel this way yourself, Sandy?
I just find it so thoughtful.
You don't find that that doesn't make you want to, rage against the dying of the light? You're fine with sitting back and letting that darkness come?
I don't know if fine is the right word.
Resigned to? Find beauty in?
I think resignation implies not caring, doesn't it? And I do care very much. But I also find an incredible truth in there being darkness.
Yeah. Well, the contrast alone is a requirement of all of these things. Everything we talk about nothing means anything unless you're comparing it to something else. So light doesn't mean anything unless you have darkness.
Hmm.
British accent, Scottish accent doesn't mean anything unless you have an American accent to compare it against.
Sally Mann believes herself to be photographing energy.
Do you believe that she can photograph energy?
I do. In the same way that you can tell me that energy is moving through water, I can say that I believe Sally Mann is photographing energy.
Well, to some extent, it's implicitly true because, photons of light are energetic and, that's what's causing changes in the film, etc. But yeah, I don't know that I go down to the woo. I don't go down the woo-woo path very easily. So
no, and nor does she. In fact, she actually made fun of herself for even talking vaguely about a sense of spirit in her work when I was watching the interview she did with Edmund Duval.
By the way, this was on YouTube somewhere?
Yeah, you can watch it. It's the Frank, it's Edmund Duval and Sally Mann. It is just a very interesting dialogue between two artists who
Isn't it fascinating though, the idea that YouTube's pretty crazy that you and I can watch, a talk between two relatively obscure artists at any time we want from anywhere in the world.
Are they obscure?
Well, I think in the general global sense, all artists are obscure because no one knows anybody, I think maybe 10% of people in the West know who Sally Mann is. Tops, maybe 5%. And she's one of the top 20, 30 photographers alive. Can you name me a contemporary painter that you think anybody in your family would also know?
Yes.
People don't care about art.
Well, maybe I just come from a strange anomaly family, but
okay, fair enough.
No, I do know what you're saying. YouTube is extraordinary, and I think
it's kind of cool.
I would recommend watching her conversation.
You should put a link in the description of this video.
Yeah. Well, tonight I've really been about trying to big up these people in terms of like Melissa Fleming. Please do go and look at the weather. Gambit, please do go and look at her website for her photographs. Go and look at Frank Relle's website. All of this stuff is so interesting. And much as we're talking very particularly now about YouTube and how bizarre and extraordinary it is, I always love spending time on people's websites, especially artists who are not at the zenith of ultra fame, because often those websites are constructed by the artists themselves.
Sure.
And they're very revealing, in terms of, like my world of making assumptions. What one can
You're assuming they're being honest about what they're creating and putting on their website.
No, Bill, let's not get confused about that. I'm not assuming that what I'm being told exactly
is how they feel.
But I am always very interested in the potential for there to be something revealed or truthful, even in a lie.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
It just depends on how closely one wants to look and how attentively one wants to listen.
Are you going to rewrite my website at some point?
Just let me get my hands on it.
That's a heck of a name. Look at that guy. Aristotle Roufanis.
Greek, lives in London now. And this is an odd image to have put at the end, but
That doesn't look like London.
no, and actually we're not supposed to identify the actual place, but he
Okay.
does shoot around the world, big metropolises, and that's the point of his work. And in terms of our title, Darkness Falls, I picked this because darkness for this artist is very much about human emotion in darkness. So the work, again, you can go and look on a very excellent website, but also there's a really good article written about him on 1854, and you can search for him. There's quite a lot of different things written about him. This idea that you're photographing loneliness, human loneliness, and this is called Alone Together from 2017, and again it's a series, so there's quite a few different images in this group. We are as if elevated somehow, given a prime spot looking down, which I think is interesting in itself, but the sense is that we're in darkness. Now on the screen now, of course, we're looking on a screen, and as a print, these prints are vast. They're between 3 and 5 meters wide, his work, his prints. And he uses some state-of-the-art tech to layer multiple images to get the highest possible clarity
Okay.
at these vast sizes. Anyway, all the work is characterized by these points of illumination, where somebody somewhere is living, where somebody somewhere is alive. And in so many ways, the reason why there was any sense of continuity for me through all of these images is that we've had the flicker of light on Melissa Fleming's Crest of the Wave. We've had Relle's beautiful Face of the Moon. We've had Sally Mann's Soft Glow. And then we have the illuminated window. And they're all in some way, I suppose, representative of light or life. They could also all be points of, I don't know what the opposite of a black hole is, but where all energy goes to in the frame.
It's interesting. The lower right lighted window draws me more than the one in the middle does.
Well, I mean, there are other points of illumination, of course, if you look. But again, this is why there's maybe a lot of interest in this kind of image. It's a bit of a Where's Waldo of stuff.
Every once in a while I'll lie in bed and I'll have the window open and it'll be quiet, right? Because it's 2 a.m. or something. And I live in a neighborhood in Brooklyn where within 100 yards of me, there's probably, I don't know, 1,000 people. And sometimes it's just interesting to me to think I'm lying here and there's no one making any sound that I can hear. And there's 1,000 people within earshot of me. That makes you uncomfortable having that many people around? You just made a visceral sound.
Yeah, it does actually. As I get older, I start to realize that I'm not keen on huge numbers of people.
It's interesting because when I go out to, say, my mother's house and there are very few people around, that makes me very uncomfortable. If I go out to the middle of nowhere, if you go out to Utah or something and then going down a state road in the middle of the night where if you pulled off and turned off your car, there's no one within 20 miles of you, that makes me very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that would make me feel uncomfortable as well. But
it's creepy.
But I think where there's just a density of humans, it's like we're locusts.
No, see, I see it as community. What's interesting about this one, though, is that because we're looking into something that is implicitly someone in there has the light on and is in one of those rooms, right? that I'm not thinking about the photographer in this one in the same way I was thinking about the photographer in the ones where there are no obvious people in the frame. This feels more omnipotent, looking down upon the world
Mm.
and the little ants that are crawling around and the world, that kind of thing, than the others do. It's also the only one that's from an elevated position too, The rest are rather close.
Mm. I mean, other people have likened Roufanis's work to Hopper. This idea that Hopper was painting loneliness. Like when Hopper talked about Nighthawks, he said that he admitted that, looking back, he realized subconsciously he was actually painting urban loneliness.
Sure.
And I mean, it's a big theme, but I'm interested in how darkness plays to that theme. Like, would we feel so lonely? Would we even register alone or loneliness were this photograph of daytime? In the same way that if we ramp up the light, do we change what quality changes with light or with darkness? And it's about, I guess, reading where our stop points are in our own experience of are we afraid of the dark? How do we feel about being alone?
And why are we afraid of the dark? I mean,
Do we somehow or for some reason identify with stories? Like I told you earlier, I identify with stories about the moon. That's in part because of, folk tales I would have been told as a child, and, looking at the moon and being explained why it was so important. Well, especially, I guess, island communities as well, reliant on lunar activity, the ocean, the sea, the water. And actually, when I look back, of course, this is often, with the exception of the final image, in some way or another, also about water.
What if I identify with the creepy murderer in those mangrove swamps off to the left of that other photo?
Well, you know what? If that's what you see and that's the story you've got, then that's what's informing how you feel about this. Isn't it great? And what a luxury it is that we have the chance to feel something about these things.
Well, I think, you and I have talked a lot about our personal experiences and stuff. And I think that when I see images that are dark, I tend to equate them with dark things in my own life. And it's like, well, I don't want to go anywhere near that. I've experienced that already, I've seen bad. I don't want any more bad if I can help it.
Is dark bad?
Well, yeah, I mean, from a very, lizard brain thing, yes.
But
you
yes,
you don't see it that way.
well, I mean, I'm very aware that we have these deep archetypal issues about things that compromise their survival. For example, it's not sensible to be out in the dark where there could be predators lurking. Yeah. But as we don't have to always go back to the default of our lizard brain, and as we do have other things to support our choices and the way we think, I do wonder why we still are so aligned with darkness as badness, darkness as evil, that somehow something bad will always happen in the dark.
Do you think there's an element? There's also the side of it which says that you can get away with things in the dark. So maybe it's people's fear of themselves. The little Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing.
Do you think that darkness equates to loneliness?
Yeah, that's a safe interpretation.
I mean, do you have the description of the blue hour? But really, do you have a time where you feel like you're most bleak, and is it usually in darkness?
Um, it's interesting when it's dark out. I feel much more, actually, I feel much more productive when it's dark out. I think because I can't tell that time is changing. So it's easier for me to get into sort of a flow state
Yeah.
because I'm not conscious of time.
Mm.
Um, I tend to become very centered in the dark. In the dark, assuming I'm inside working and it's dark outside. Not that if you sat me out on a chair in the middle of the woods in the dark, I don't know that I would necessarily feel that way. But there is sort of a meditative flow state that happens, I think, in darkness.
Mm.
I generally don't seek it out. Yeah, yeah. Darkness and loneliness. I never really thought about it that way, but it's almost in some ways that's the good kind of loneliness. Like I'm alone with myself.
I think a lot of people equate being alone and it being dark as being like the worst. Like there's a value to things, like people who always ascribe value to things. Darkness is bad. Alone
Wait,
is
who
bad.
are these people who always assign value to things?
Is it you, Bill Wadman?
I assign my own value to things. Everyone else can assign their own as well.
I'm glad we cleared this up. Well, thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Sandi.
This has been truly opaque.
Dark.